ultimately, because it was open sourced at some point, because the project was done in the open, it means that it has been audited more than most code out there to make sure that there is no backdoor, that there is nobody being able to control this thing in some way, like the CIA would want to with a digital currency. They would want to have access to surveil, right? They're an intelligence organization. That would be their intention. There is many other places that they would that like essentially what I'm alluding to here is like stable coins, CBDCs. These are the types of instruments as far as digital currency that would be much more intriguing to an organization like the CIA. And since it's been open sourced, if there is anything wrong with it, it can be modified. You could download Bitcoin, the Bitcoin reference implementation, modify it however you want, as long as it's compliant with the network that still exists. You will join back onto that network with that slight modification. If you change it, the consensus of it, you'll be running an entirely different network, and many people have done that exact thing. But that is part of what open source makes it way more transparent than what he's implying, right? And the hardware is a lot less important than the software in this case, right? Like they both need to exist for Bitcoin to run. There needs to be people running full nodes and using Bitcoin nodes, but the software is what allows them to do that. And the software exists in repositories, and anyone can download it. Anybody can audit it. Anybody can look at it. And so you begin to see that if you have questions around the validity of it, the safety of it, those can be answered because it is open source. If it was closed source, nobody should trust it. If Bitcoin was a closed source project, I wouldn't be talking about it right now. It's the only reason it exists in the scale that it is, the interest that it has, the future potential that it has, is because it's open source. It's all because it's open source. If it was another closed source project, it would be like Google creating a money that is going to revolutionize the world. I wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't buy it because it wouldn't be able to fulfill that goal.
If you live in Europe like I do and want to buy Bitcoin the right way, check out Relay. Relay is a Bitcoin-only platform with no distractions, no shitcoins, just a BTC. It's also the easiest way I've found to do what actually works, buying Bitcoin on a consistent basis. Relay is also self-custodial. They never have the keys to your Bitcoin. No freezing of your assets, no counterparty risk, no rug pulling whatsoever. I have been a long-term fan of Relay, not only because it's incredible, easy to use and very beginner friendly, but also because it just works. If you want to get started with Relay today, click the link down in the pinned comment or in the description, and once you have downloaded the app, type in Robin in the referral code section of the app to save 10% on fees. So set up your DCA Bitcoin plan today with the Relay app and get cheaper Bitcoin if you use code Robin. With microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Finally, we have BTC Prague back in 2026. And this year, I'm not only speaking on a panel, but I'm actually going to present an interesting new angle perspective, a Bitcoin thesis at BTC Prague this year for the first time ever. I've never done that on any other conference, so this will be a fun one. If you listen to this show on a regular basis, I would love to meet you in Prague this year. It's very high signal, no noise, and Prague is just a freaking amazing city with awesome drinks and a lot of good food. Use code Robin to get 10% off, and if you buy with Bitcoin, you get an additional 5% off your ticket price. I'll see you there in Prague. Make sure to come say hi. I love that. I want to make a quick detour because I'm curious what your thoughts on open source is, and then coming just briefly back to that, because it's so interesting, because the TCP/IP protocol, like the very foundation all the internet is built on, we all know it's open source. Like also the email protocols is basically open source. But then the clients, or how should I say, the applications on top of the internet, like Google, Gmail, Facebook, like StreamYard, what we're using now, where we're streaming to YouTube, like all those things are closed sourced. And I'm thinking a lot if this will be ending up also like that on Bitcoin, where Bitcoin, the underlying protocol is open sourced, the underlying network and asset is open sourced, but then we are using more and more like closed sourced things as products on top of that. I mean, like Stretch is one thing that's a whole different level of closed sourced, because it's an IOU basically, but most people just like having an exchange, don't do all the things that most YouTubers actually preach in Bitcoin, like self-custody, run your own node and all of that. How do you actually look at open source in the Bitcoin community, and this kind of, we use an open source protocol, but then using a closed sourced application to use the open source protocol?
It's a really good question, and I think that's one that people should seriously be asking and thinking about. Like, it's not an exact comparison, but you could think of like an exchange that you hold your Bitcoin on as a closed source application of Bitcoin, because you don't really know, like, it's an internal ledger. It's not software, so it's not, well, I mean, it is, but it's not a perfect analogy, but you could think of it in that way. And people don't want to hold Bitcoin on an exchange. I mean, many people do, but Bitcoiners that understand the risks of it end up not wanting to do that, because there has been dozens and dozens of exchange failures. So there's instability with closed source systems. And I think it's entirely a possibility. So again, back to your sort of analogy of like the protocol of TCP/IP, email was built on top of that. You can host your own email service, but you're going to have a hard time getting your emails delivered to the systems like a Gmail. Like if you send from your own server to a Gmail account, it's going to end up in the spam folder, or they might not even accept it at all, because of the open source nature of it, because it's so easy to set up your own email server, and because it's so inexpensive to send emails from your own server, it was used by people trying to scam people. So it becomes this, it sort of closed down to protect itself and to make sure that there's some sort of semblance of control and continuity to the emails you receive, right? So it is all open source. It is still there, but like the garden has become walled out of necessity to some degree. So you could think about that into Bitcoin, and you could think, okay, well, is there a potential where something like that could happen on some sort of layer of Bitcoin, where there's some sort of necessity for it to be closed, or some sort of incentive for it to be closed? And you could see that happen, but I think it's part of like, what is the use case, right? So if the use case of this closed source software on top of Bitcoin is so useful that you have to use it, right? We have to use email. It's so useful to use. So we have to use sort of the closed in gardens of Gmail, Proton, whatever, right? It's so useful. But what could be built on top of Bitcoin that is so useful that you are restricted into a closed source application? Not sure I can't think of anything, right? Like Bitcoin the use case of blockchain technology, of a decentralized financial ledger, is money, right? And so, like, the things that have been built on top of Bitcoin are all to facilitate some aspect of money. So, on chain, the technology of being able to have a seed phrase that's allowed people to be able to store their value better because they now have a way to protect their Bitcoin in a way. The Lightning Network, built on top of Bitcoin, completely open source, and allows the medium of exchange method to happen faster and easier through payment channels and a routing network more privately. It becomes more usable as a medium of exchange. So if Bitcoin is money and that's its use case, we've already sort of established the way to use it as money in those ways. And there'll be things like Arc and Spark and other ways to speak Lightning or to balance channels or to have ownership over the contract of Bitcoin in these channels, or however that ends up working. But if Bitcoin is money, where is the necessity for something to become closed source? Where is the ease or use of something that's closed source? And I think because Bitcoin is so, I think because the people developing in Bitcoin, working on Bitcoin, working on layer twos, they're fanatical, like they're obsessed. And I think that ethos of open source continues to propagate through there because it can only be trusted if it's open source, in my opinion, and I think many others. And so I think that continues to evolve in that way. And I think actually that's why a lot of other companies, these massive companies, these tech companies, are really not that interested in Bitcoin, because the reason to close source something is because then you can profit from it. Open source is really difficult to make money from. You sort of have to rely on grants, donations. There might be some sort of pricing mechanism you can have on open source software to offer some service for that to make it easier. But it's pretty difficult. It's not really an endeavor that you should make as a company seeking profits for your shareholders. So I think, again, if they try to develop something, it's going to be some centralized crypto rail thing. There might be elements of it that are open source or taken from open source projects, but then made closed. How useful those things end up being is kind of a unknown of the future. But to me, the use case of Bitcoin is money, and the open source layers and technology that we've built with Bitcoin continue to work and will continue to develop in an open source manner. But it's not without its risks. That what you're suggesting or what you're theorizing could be possible, but again, it's difficult to imagine it. But I'm sure people probably thought that about the internet too. Like, we're going to have this sort of open source revolution. I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know, and it'd be interesting to look back in the history of that more. But you could argue that the internet has been co-opted a lot, right? That there is a lot of surveillance, there is a lot of problems with internet usage now, and it really probably did start, or a large part of it was sort of this space of digital freedom. So, I mean, my hope is that doesn't happen with Bitcoin, and I think it's really important to be diligent about that. And that's why I think that question you asked is actually like one of the most important questions to ask. It's really about like, what is the future of Bitcoin, right?
It is. I first time thought about that question when I had my oldest guest on my podcast ever on. He was, at time of the recording, around 75, 76 years old. And I asked him, because he was not only alive during all the internet coming ups and stuff like that, he actually worked as a network engineer in that time from the very start. And so I asked him, like, what kind of similarities or differences do you see between the internet revolution and the Bitcoin revolution? And one of his examples were, in the beginning, all the people that worked in networking and the networks and the internet revolution, we all thought, in his small circle thought, that we all will run some version of our email server ourselves. And he made the analogy of running your own node now with Bitcoin. Now we have that, like we all will run our own nodes, like we should do that, and it's self-custody, not like having your own keys, protecting them yourself, running your own node, protecting that yourself, not broadcasting just to someone else that has the data, and all of those things. And I found it so interesting, and that kind of triggered for me to ask the question, where do we go with Bitcoin? Because we have, how many people do we have that have exposure to Bitcoin in some way, shape, or form? 100 million, 500 million, I don't know. Somewhere in between is probably a correct number. Then how many people of those actually hold their own keys? It's a very small portion of them. And then how many of them hold their own keys and run their own node? Like a very small subject section of that. And so if we already are in the early phases at like 1% adoption or whatever it is of self-custody and running your own node, whatever the real number is probably under 1% even. How will it be in 20 years and 30 years if the apps and the ecosystem are even more developed in the Bitcoin ecosystem? And people, I want to talk a little bit later also around stretch and strategy, but I said it probably on our BTC Mastermind live streams also at some point. But when I talked to my mom and my sister about stretch, they're like, "Oh, how can I buy it?" When I talked about Bitcoin, they still did it, but I think mostly just because I'm so annoying on it. They're like, you have to have it, like do it. And so with Stretch, they were like really interested, like, and like their own interest came out like, oh, 11%. Like that's really cool. Like how can that, the only question is always just like, how can I trust it? But that's kind of where I'm getting at. You have an amazing technology. You know, if you buy that, hold your own keys, run your own node, you will massively benefit, just not only from a wealth perspective, but also from a freedom perspective over the next 10 years. But then people don't do it because they're too lazy to set up their own node. They are afraid of the volatility and like 100 other reasons. And this kind of, I don't know, this, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just like an observation I have and an annoyance for myself, because I see so few people actually taking advantage of what Bitcoin is, and so many just wanting to do what everyone else is doing, which is usually the average, which is usually not that good.
Yeah, and I think this all this all made me think of the way that I look at the world, which is incentive driven. So everything, I think, the way the world is shaped today, everything we all do as individuals is all incentive driven. It's mostly selfish, and a large part of it is financial. So I think that could be, I'm just sort of theorizing this now as we're talking, but like looking back at the internet, there's not as much financial incentive to be running your own email server, to host your own emails. There's sort of a freedom aspect, a sovereignty aspect, and those could be incentives for sure. But then as it becomes more challenging to do so, those incentives could sort of not be as valuable, right? Then there's the incentive to just sort of join what's easy, what works, and what will actually get your email through. Bitcoin is, people have called it like the internet of money, right? And there's no way to have actually bought into the TCP IP protocol and the email protocol. Yes, you could set up your own server. That's as close as you could to buying into it, but there's no financial incentive really to have done that. So I think that's what fundamentally makes it different and makes makes it possible potentially into the future where there is going to be this constant financial incentive to get as close to real Bitcoin as possible, right? So that that you don't lose your Bitcoin in a hack, by having it in a vulnerable wallet that's online, right? Being able to have it in these secure open source systems protects you ultimately. All right. So I think that financial underlying of it, that Bitcoin is money, actually begins to shape the way it develops a lot differently than the internet. And I think that's actually one thing that's so interesting about Bitcoin is we always try to analogize it back to something that we already see in the world, that we understand, that we have some ability to comprehend. It's digital gold. Again, it's the internet of money. It's not. It's a decentralized financial ledger. Each one of those things needs to be understood. And beyond that, right? What does that mean to be decentralized? Well, it means that there's many copies of it. It's financial in nature. We've ascribed value to the units on there. It's a ledger, right? So that's a database of history of transactions, of movement, that we all have a copy of. These things really just need to be like so understood. And I think that comparing it to the internet is the best analogy we have as far as like from a technical side. But I think it falls apart because it is fundamentally different in the way that it is incentivized by individuals. And I think that eventually people will, like, more and more people will wake up to that. And it's from rug pulls, closed source software failing, it's from exchange failures, it's from all of those kind of things. And it's from, you and I and many others talking about these subjects and talking about self-custody and talking about the incentives. And some of the incentives aren't perfect, right? Like I made a video not long ago talking about why people should run their own node, and the incentives are really for additional privacy and additional sovereignty. So it's sort of a stretch to like push that into like a financial incentive. Privacy could be argued as privacy can like blend over to security really easily, and then security can be a financial incentive so that you don't lose your Bitcoin. But it's not as obvious. Like so many questions in my node videos, do you get paid for running a node? No, you don't. You don't get any Bitcoin for running a node. So it's like the incentives aren't fully aligned there, and that's a challenge. And that's why there's way more Bitcoin holders, because there's a financial incentive to hold Bitcoin, and way less node runners because there's not a clear financial incentive to run nodes. So maybe, I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do see Bitcoin as being comparable to the internet, but fundamentally different because of the incentives that underlie it.
Yeah, and people also are more drawn to like have a miner running, and like if you run a miner like yourself, you have to run a node also. Like this is kind of like
you don't
kind of
technically have to.
Yeah, but like I don't know if you've not seen a lot of people that don't do it. I don't like if you really run your own miner. Like I've never done that actually. Like I don't run my own miner, so I don't know about it. But don't you need like isn't it, if you go through the trouble and setting up your miner in your own home, like wouldn't you run your own node also?
Many people don't. I mean, it's better to. There actually is a financial incentive to do that to some degree. So like you can just contribute your hash rate. Like you can set up a miner in about 15 minutes and then just contribute your hash rate to a pool or to a solo pool, and they'll just take a small fee for doing that. You can get a node and then you can run your own datum server and then connect to a pool, and then essentially if you hit a block, you would actually construct your own block template, and you could contribute to a pool or solo even with that setup. So the difference is that you can be a hasher without running your own node if you're a miner, and you're contributing your hash rate to somebody else's node, but you can't be a miner without running your own node if you're mining or if you're hashing. That would be the difference there. But technically you could, and you would still get rewarded in Bitcoin for the amount of hash rate that you would contribute.
Yeah, because I was thinking about the reward, and like with mining, you get a reward, and having a solo miner at home and a node connected, I think it's just like a nice, just a learning experience. Even if you don't get anything real out of it, solo miner, you probably won't get rich. Like you can have a lucky hit, and we had a couple of instances already where a solo miner actually mined just for himself and hit a block. I think we had like, 2-3 instances of people posting it online and doing that. But otherwise, it's more of a learning experience. But yeah, mining is a fun one. It took me a while. I came into mining a little bit late last year. It's a fun experience having some like natural Bitcoin income that's actually like in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Yeah, it's like a DCA of potentially non-KYC Bitcoin. And it's really easy to, as a home miner, be able to mine non-KYC Bitcoin. And you might be paying a premium for that based on your residential electricity rates. I just did a calculation of my Bitforge, which is like twice the power of a Bitaxe Gamma, and it cost me about a 4% premium to mine. But it spat out, electrical heat, so it offset a little bit of my electrical costs for heating my room here, and gave me non-KYC Bitcoin at a 4.5% premium.
The first thing that every Bitcoiner does, and the most important activity that every Bitcoiner keeps on doing, is buying Bitcoin. And I personally use Relay to buy and sometimes also spend or sell my Bitcoin. And there are two main reasons why I do so. The first one is it's Bitcoin only. They do not do any shit coins. They do not do any cryptos, any stocks, or anything else. This is a tool, an app that is fully focused only and solely on Bitcoin. The second one is self-custody. They give you the keys to your Bitcoin the moment you buy them. You never give them the control over your Bitcoin, and you don't have to trust them because you can verify that you and only you have the keys to your Bitcoin. There's no third-party risk. There's no freezing of your assets. There's no rug pulling. There's nothing of that. Download Relay, the app, on your phone, or go to relay.app on your browser and use code Robin to save fees and get cheaper Bitcoin. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called micro-seed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With micro-seed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io.